Hi everybody! Don't forget to hit the play button. It's so you can hear my voice, and of course, if you can hear that, then you know what you've already hit that button. Welcome to Healthy TV, and my name is Dr. John McPhee, and today I want to talk about a question that was that came from one of our listeners or one of our viewers, and that's last week we were talking about choosing making good choices at the farmers market, and how to buy local. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about buying local over organic and that kind of stuff. And the question that she asked was, what types of questions should I be asking the farmers when I'm at the farmers market? So I thought, what a great topic, and I could do a whole show on that. In fact, I could probably talk much longer than the show. So I'm going to make sure that arm you with the appropriate questions so you get the right kinds of answers, so you can make the best choices to provide. Remember, the goal is to find the highest nutrient density foods, okay, with the lowest toxicity. So just before we dive into that, I love to welcome all the viewers on here. I see a couple of friends on here. Dr. Hawks, thanks for coming along. He's going to be there moderating any questions that come through, so feel free to supply any questions or comments. And hey, Mark, good buddy from home, from PEI, now in Toronto, so it's great to see you. So I wanted to I want to make this interactive. So if you do have any particular questions about, maybe some challenges you run into at the farmers market, I'm sure there's some pretty interesting ones that could come from there. But if you've had any, burning questions, maybe some confusion, I'm going to address some of those today. Please just put them in the comments below, and I'll try to address them real time. I am a little bit technically, I would say, hamstrung here. I can't see comments. I'm going to see if I can see comments. But if I can't, I will address them in the comment section afterward when this video gets posted in the save section. So let's just dive right in. These are some questions that anytime if I'm in a new city, or if I happen to be on holiday and I'm shopping at a new farmer's market, these are kind of the typical questions that I would ask, and it really gives me a good indication of the quality of the food. And we're going to start off, when we're talking about fruits and vegetables, there's really a couple of key criteria that you want to figure out right off the bat. So some of these are pretty low-hanging fruit. Is it organic or not? But within that, you'll notice market stalls will actually advertise. If they're organic, it'll say this is organic produce, and that's because they've paid a ton of money to have that license to be able to advertise. So they've had to satisfy a bunch of different requirements and regulations in order to be classified as organic. The other word that you may come across is biodynamic. All intents and purposes, it's the same. Okay, there's some very minor differences. Do a quick Wikipedia search and you'll be able to find those. I won't go into it. But for all intents and purposes, biodynamic and organic are the same in Canada. So that's a good first question. If it's not clear from their marketing, I always ask the question anyway, and the way I frame it is usually, do you apply any organic practices? And the reason why I ask is because a lot of farmers, especially smaller farmers, they just simply can't afford the regulations that are required to meet those, to be able to claim to be organic. You're talking in the thousands of dollars at the very least. And so if it's a small production, small production farm, they simply can't afford it. Usually their answer is, well, you know what, we operate in, we apply all the same practices as organic farms, but unfortunately we just can't afford the regulatory costs. So that's usually the first question. The second question, if you want to be really, if you're seeking toward the highest nutrient density, then heirloom varieties tend to be at the top of the hierarchy. So you can always ask if they use heirloom varieties of seeds. What that means is that those are, as the name implies, they're old varieties, usually before the turn of the century or before, is my experience. And so, I mean, you could think of those as being kind of the most likely types of seeds that we evolved with over time, versus some of the more recent seed production practices, with genetically modified seeds and stuff. That's kind of more of a personal choice. I actually don't have any particular opposition to genetically modified foods. Maybe I'll save that for another day, because that may raise some eyebrows in some of you. But really, you want to, if that's a concern for you, then you can ask about heirloom varieties. The third question I usually ask is, when was the food picked? And this is a really crucial distinction. If you listened to the show a couple of episodes ago, the time since picked is actually probably the biggest determinant of the quality of the food. Is optimal, and then you want to eat that food as quickly as possible. You want to gain the best benefit. So that's usually the third thing I ask. And then when it can get even a little bit more, there's certain markets, one in particular, I was kind of hoodwinked by this when I first moved to Australia, where it appeared like these were producers of the food directly, the farmers that actually produce the food, but in reality it was just really like small grocery stores in a market environment. So they just went to the local wholesale food store, they bought up produce, and then they set up stalls at the market. So that's a good question to ask. In Ottawa, if you're actually local, we're really lucky. Any market that's under the kind of the main questions I ask, fruit and veg. Of course, if they're not organic, if we could go back to that first question, then you can ask about the amount of pesticides and herbicides they use. And I think that's a really, my experience is that's a really important question to ask, because there's lots of farms that actually use some, but they'll actually use minimal, or they'll describe it as like, we use as little as necessary. And often it's at the early stages before the fruit or the vegetable is actually growing on the plant. It's usually just when it's, I suppose, like the plant itself and the leaves. So that has a different impact, and I would argue probably a less toxic impact. A good way to just judge maybe what you'd choose to buy organic only, and then what you'd choose maybe be okay with. This is how I decide which produce I'm going to buy organic, is a list that's put out by the Environmental Working Group every year. And in fact, I'll add this to the comments. So it's called a Dirty Dozen, and they also produce a list called the Clean 15. So the Dirty Dozen is, what they do is they take all of the last list, I mean, it's a couple hundred anyway. And so the Dirty Dozen is the top 12 highest levels of toxicity. And then the Clean 15 are the ones on the other end of the list. So the ones that have the least amount of toxicity. And so I find that really useful for myself. I use that all the time. There's even like a phone app version of it. If you just make a donation, $5, and you can get access to that list. So I'll put a link below at the end, and you'll be able to follow through on that. So really, I think that's some of the key questions if it's fruit and veg producers. If we talk about the animal products, so meat, poultry, eggs, cheese, there's a similar list of questions, but some specific ones. So again, if we start on just meat, and in particular, the answer is going to be yes. The second question is, do they get grain finished? That's a very common practice. For me personally, I try not to buy any animals that are fed grains, because grains may be a surprise to you, but grains are actually quite toxic, and in particular to both humans. So they may be grass-fed up to 6 weeks prior to cultivation, but then they're fed grains to fatten them up. So again, up to you to decide that. For me, I like to stick to just grass-fed 100%. The particular farmer that I buy from most often, their animals are literally like as close to wild as possible. They are contained, but they pretty much make their own way. They eat grass in the summer, they eat hay in the winter, they make their own shelter. So I think a good rule for that is, highest nutrient density is going to be coming from animals that live their own by design life. Usually then the next question I ask is, actually I guess another criteria would be whether it's pasture raised. So if you're talking about, say, chickens, chickens that are pasture raised, meaning that they are able to get outside, they're kind of able to move around on their own, they're able to peck at the ground. Usually to be able to find the majority of their food, it's hard to find, particularly in this area, it's hard to find chickens that are, in my experience anyway, hard to find chickens that are 100% self-sufficient. Usually they are fed a little bit of feed, and for me, I'm okay with that. Usually it's maybe like 10-15% is what I've been told by farmers. Chickens are a little bit different because their digestive system is actually designed to handle grains and seeds. So So for them, it's actually not as big of an issue. The one I would caveat that I put in there is that often chicken feed is made up of soy. And so again, personally, based on the research that I've read, I really don't believe that consuming soy protein is healthy for any animals, and so certainly not a bean that a chicken in the wild would ever come across. So I avoid that. But if it's other seeds, corn, then I'm okay with that, as long as it's in the minority, 10-15% of their feed. So that would be chickens. Some other questions that I usually ask, again, location. So is it how many food miles? When was it cultivated? The good thing about meat is that if it's frozen after it's processed, then it maintains almost 100% of its nutrient density. So most of these farmers, when you buy it off them at the markets, it's already frozen. So even if it is a few months old, that's not a big issue. And let's see, I think another question kind of goes along with whether they're pasture raised is just the environment that they grow up in. Do they have room to play around? Do they have ability to socialize as they're designed to? A good example of that is pigs. Pigs are a very social animal apparently, and so but they do require a fair amount of space. So the pig farms that I've gone to that are they at least describe themselves as kind of more natural environment. There's a lot of space for the pigs to move around, to burrow, to create their own shelters, and also to socialize. So that gives you a few questions about just generally meat, poultry. Eggs follow along the same lines as chickens. It is possible to find pasture-raised eggs, at least in Ottawa. At least at this stage, my understanding is that the farmers can only produce up to 300 chickens, so they're only able to produce a very limited amount of eggs relative to the demand. So the cost is usually a lot higher because their actual costs are much higher because they can't scale up. Now there is apparently changes happening in the legislation which is going to allow them to produce more. I'm not the expert on that, so maybe do a Google search to see where that's at in Ontario anyway. The other aspect of animal products that I personally touch on this because there is a bit of I think confusion around cured meats, and even I think some myths relating to maybe the fact that they're unhealthy or that they're perhaps dangerous to eat. Certainly there's been some research recently that's come out about cured meats being relating to development of cancer. And so I just wanted to maybe demystify and give you some criteria. For me, I think, first of all, the same list of questions, the health of the animal, how is it produced, and so you get those answers, and then just ask about the process and the ingredients list. So ingredients, typically what you want to find in cured meats is really just salt, spices, and nitrates or nitrites. I'll touch on that in a moment, and maybe some sugar. Really, that should be the only ingredients. Oh, and the meat, obviously. So the 5 ingredients. Oftentimes when you go to the grocery store, you're buying more kind of conventionally produced cured meats than cured meats. So you want to ask about that. Is there any gluten added? Are there any stabilizers, fixers? And personally, I would not choose to buy those. Obviously, you got to apply your own standards. And as far as the process, based on my research, the healthiest, kind of most natural process when it comes to curing the meats, it's actually a fermentation process. And so dried curing apparently is actually the most, creates the most, maintains the most nutrient density. And so you want to find, personally that's what I buy, is dry cured meats. And smoked meats as well. I have not, although there's lots of hysteria around cooking meats over fires and smoke, I have not found really convincing evidence that there's any carcinogenic effects of that. The other thing I mentioned there, which often people bring up, is nitrates or nitrites. It really is, at least based on my interpretation of the evidence, really not any good quality evidence to support that nitrates are bad for us. In fact, we consume a lot of nitrates naturally. Some of the highest foods containing nitrates as green leafy vegetables. Nitrates are actually added to cured meats for a very specific reason. It's actually to help to prevent the development of bad bacteria. Botulism would be would be the key one. And so it's actually a very purposeful additive to cured meats, and something that obviously was learned over thousands of years of curing meats, because that was really the only way we had to preserve meats in the past. So I don't have any problems consuming nitrates or meats containing cheese, actually. So that's another thing that I do buy, try in the summers at least, exclusively buy cheese at the markets. And that's because it's the easiest place to find raw cheese. I mean, you can find raw cheese in a grocery store and usually in like local delis and bistros and things like that. But there's some great cheese producers in Ottawa that I'm a huge fan of. And the biggest criteria is that it's raw. Raw dairy is much easier for the human body to digest. Dairy is still a gray area, so there are a big segment of the population that just simply don't have the ability to digest dairy. So again, you got to do your own research and look at your lineage. If you have a Northern European lineage, then chances are you're well adapted to dairy. Otherwise, it's likely that you're not well adapted to dairy. So do your research. If you have any questions about that, I can maybe put it in the comments below if you'd like me to do a whole topic on dairy, because that's something that I've spent a lot of time learning about. Potential for health. And so just speak to the cheesemaker about their processes, and find out the length of time that it's fermented, and you get these delicious flavors, especially if you combine that with the cured meats. Man, it makes a awesome meal, or awesome pre-meal. So I hope that was helpful. I was a little bit disjointed, but if I was unclear about anything, or if you'd like to get further information, just put it in the comments below. I'm happy to provide it. I'll check on there in the next 20 minutes, and I'll address any questions that came up. If you have any topics for further shows, I would love to get those. I'm always looking for ideas about how to come up with the framework for these shows. And yeah, so just pop it below. Any feedback for me on the presentation or the quality of the video, anything like that, feel free to give it, just put it in the comments below or send me a message. And next week, I'll be back up. Yet to be determined the topic, but it will be relating to movement and exercise, because we're moving into a Move by Design month. I'll explain more about that next week. Yeah, but I'm excited about sharing with you actually some outdoor activities that you can do in the fall. That'll be kind of the theme for the month. So until then, have an awesome evening, and yeah, enjoy your weekend.